Moving on to Russell Westbrook. So Mark Stein had a report come out today. I'm going to read a little bit of this here because I think all of this information is very relevant to what we're talking about. So there's belief, this is from Mark Stein again, there's belief that the Hornets could emerge with Westbrook interest in the name of creating some financial flexibility. Gordon Hayward has 2 seasons left on a 4-year, $120 million contract and has appeared in only 49 of Charlotte's 79 games this season. Terry Rozier has performed well this season with an above-average PER of 17.36, but next season is year 1 of a 4-year, $97 million extension, with the Hornets facing the onrushing expense of signing Miles Bridges to a lucrative contract extension this offseason, followed by the eventual prospect of a max extension for LaMelo Ball, combining one of their long-term deals with the final season of Kelly Oubre's 2-year, $24.5 million pact, as an example, could function as a workable trade framework. Any team trading for Westbrook has to send out roughly $38 million in salary, and while Hornets owner Michael Jordan has long ranked as a Westbrook admirer, it's not yet clear if that would give such a trade concept more life. This scenario has nonetheless been mentioned by multiple rival teams in recent weeks, and if nothing else, illustrates the likelihood that the Lakers would largely be limited to trades, and this is the important part, in which they are the team taking on more long-term money if they want to move off Westbrook immediately, end quote. So much interesting stuff in there. And I want to start, before we get into the framework of that specific deal, this deal with the Hornets, I want to talk about the idea of the Lakers taking on long-term salary, because I know that that can be scary for a lot of people. But we need to remember the current predicament. The current predicament is that Russell Westbrook is under contract next season for $47 million or whatever the heck that number is, some absurd number. That's the reality of the predicament. The second part of the predicament is LeBron James is going to be in his 20th season. And he might have one more really good year, one more MVP quality year left in the tank. Might. There's no guarantee. 2 years, it's even more of a stretch. It's hard to imagine LeBron coming in his 21st season as an MVP candidate type of player. So you are in a predicament right now with Russ under contract. So yeah, can we acknowledge that if you take on a long-term deal or 2 long-term deals, that's a predicament? Absolutely. That is another problem that you have to deal with. But there is a very clear difference between that problem and the Russell Westbrook problem. Let's give 2 names, for example, from this Hornets deal, because this is the way that I would structure it. So let's say that the Lakers take Terry Rozier and Kelly Oubre. So Terry Rozier's got 4 years left on the contract. And we're going to get to the Hornets side here in a second. So that's 4 years of money that you're taking back from Terry Rozier. It's a long-term deal. And Kelly Oubre, that's a big paycheck next season, $25 million, right? But here's the key difference. Russell Westbrook is a bad fit with the Lakers because he can't shoot. He's the worst shooting guard in the entire league. And he's incredibly inefficient. I firmly believe that Russell Westbrook was a negative impact on winning this season. You will have some Lakers fans, Lakers analysts that will tell you that Russ was a positive impact this season. I vehemently disagree with those people. I watched almost every game this season twice, and I see a lot of bad that comes with Russell Westbrook in conjunction with the good, stuff that's really difficult to quantify. That's why this kind of thing is subjective. But I find Russell Westbrook to be a bad basketball player right now with his impact on winning. Terry Rozier is a good basketball player. You could argue he's overpaid. I'd probably agree with you. But he's a good basketball player that would absolutely positively impact winning for the Lakers. Kelly Oubre Jr. I know he struggled in Golden State, but that's because that was a read and react system, and they counted heavily on Kelly Oubre to make complicated reads in their high motion offense, which did not play into his strengths because he's not a high basketball IQ type of player. But in spot up roles, playing in a more heliocentric system, he does a lot better. That's why he's played better this year for the Hornets than he did in Golden State. Is he overpaid? Absolutely. $25 million is too much, in my opinion, to pay Kelly Oubre. But he is still a good basketball player that would be a impact player for the Lakers. And I love the exciting dynamic of adding a super athletic wing alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis that can shoot a little bit and slash and attack closeouts. So, even though those are overpaid players, those are two overpaid players that absolutely can play a role for the Lakers next season versus one vastly overpaid player that actively hurts the team. That's the way you have to look at that dynamic. Now, so the next question becomes, why would the Hornets do the deal? So, it's pretty simple. Just like Mr. Stein laid out in his report, they're not part of the long-term strategy of the franchise. They probably don't want to have a guy like Terry Rozier next to LaMelo Ball. It's probably better with a playmaking guard like LaMelo Ball to have a more defensive-minded, bigger, taller guard in that position. Someone that can take a lot of the lead ball handling defense responsibilities away from LaMelo Ball and who's more comfortable playing alongside LaMelo Ball in a heliocentric system, whereas Terry Rozier is a little bit more ball dominant. So that's why you would try to potentially get off that contract. It's a 4-year deal. It ties you up for a long time. Guy, if you look at the core of the Hornets, you're looking at LaMelo Ball. You're looking at Miles Bridges, who's had a great season. He shot 40% from three last year. His shooting has fallen off a little bit this year, but he's gone into much higher volume. He's showing a ton of promise, especially of late. So if you're the Hornets, you're looking at it like, we're building around Ball and Bridges, and PJ Washington and other young electric players that they currently have under contract. They're not worried about Gordon Hayward in their future. They're not worried about Terry Rozier in their future. And they also don't think they can win a title next season. So if you have to take on a guy like Russell Westbrook for a year, even though that's not a fantastic situation, it's just for one season. You get off of the long-term money of Terry Rozier. Or if it's Gordon Hayward, you get off of 2 more years of Gordon Hayward. It's essentially and then this is the important part. They're going to be able to ask for draft compensation. The Lakers have 2 first-round draft picks that they can trade this summer. Let's say you just get one of the first-round draft picks. That's what you pitch to the Hornet fan base, is we're not doing anything next year anyway. We have all this other long-term money tied up in players that aren't considered the core of what we're trying to accomplish. So why don't we get Russ, get off some of this long-term money, get draft compensation. It'll help us build around our core, and we'll just deal with it for 1 year. Now, what do you do with Russ? Well, you leave that decision up to him. If he's willing to come in and be a leader in a much smaller role, potentially off the bench, you let him come into the team. But if he doesn't want to do that, if he wants to come in and step on everybody's toes and be Russ, you do what the Rockets did with John Wall, and you send him home. Or you say, you're not playing unless you're willing to embrace this role. Leave it in Russ's hands. But this is the general framework of a deal that I'm talking about. The Lakers have right now urgency. LeBron James, because of his age, they have to try to figure something out like next season, right? But there are lots of teams around the league that don't have right now urgency. They have a more forward-thinking approach. Are teams like the Hornets going to have goals of winning a championship in training camp? Of course, that's the stuff you say. But internal conversations, they're talking about how do we build a championship contender in the next 5 to 10 years. That's the way they're actually looking at it when they're being honest. They don't have the right now urgency. The Hornets would never sell the house to try to do something next year. So you are willing to put up with something like that in order to give you more flexibility in the long run. This is how this kind of thing works. Now, the Lakers next year can make use of an overpaid player and then deal with them in the future by flipping them one way or another, or at the deadline, or however they want to do that. The Lakers need to get off Russ, and there are teams around the league that need to get off of long-term money. That's how you make that work. And I'll be really interested to see who the deal ends up being, what this ends up turning out as. But that's the general framework that I expected, and that's the general framework that I think it'll end up being. All right, guys, that's all I have on the Lakers. Later tonight, we'll have a video about the Celtics and Bucks. As always, I appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys next time.